Hi, and welcome to this week's Three Legs, Four Wheels F1 podcast. It's Paul here with...
Lee.
And our special guest joining us tonight.
There's Craig Scarborough.
Hey, Craig, thanks for coming back on. And apologies that it's a pretty short-handed show tonight, but Flood's working and Sean's a little bit under the weather, so get well soon. I'll be taking her a cuppa at some point, no doubt. How are we all?
Very good. It's great to be back.
Yeah, good. No race this weekend, so it's at least it's a weekend break considering what we've had to go. Well, we've had week in, week out.
Yeah, I think a quadruple header would probably be a little bit too much.
It's surprising how intense it is, isn't it? I mean, throughout the year, we just haven't had that many weekends off. And then before you know it, we're going to be going testing again. So, yeah, I'm glad to have had a break this weekend coming up.
So you managed to get to many races this year, Craig, or have you been working remotely, just like 2020?
It's been completely remote again this year, unfortunately. I mean, I've not seen a Formula One car for so long now. I'm beginning to wonder if I'm in the wrong game. But it's only in the past two races that I could have got into the pit lane anyway. So from my point of view, there's been no point going to races. You're better off covering them remotely. As I say, we've got testing coming up in February and races next year. So hopefully I'll get out and see the cars in person and up close a lot more, because it really kind of adds to what I can do and what I can understand.
You must be excited for what's coming next year and what the teams innovate on and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, again, with it being such an intense year this year, it's taken quite a long time for me to actually really start to get my head around to the new regulations. And the more I reread them and the more I speak to people around the industry about them, the more excited I'm getting. I mean, I think we're, while it's not therefore guaranteed to give us a great season next year in terms of the car and the general direction of Formula One, I mean, it's absolutely fantastic what they're doing. And if they keep, that diligence up with the future regulations, I think we're in really good shape at the moment.
Well, I mean, talking of regulations, the ones that, as they are at the moment, that's been getting a little stretched recently. Would you say?
Yes, it has, hasn't it? In all through the year, we've had sort of all this backbiting, haven't we? And more than once, I've had to go back and reread regulations myself to see, can they really do that, or is that even possible? And more recently, we've had suspension and wings really kind of dominating some of the cheeky workarounds to those regulations. And I suppose there is that potential that it could decide the championship, either in a good or a bad way. I don't want anyone getting disqualified from past races or the future races, but I think there is some scope there for things to get really quite nasty. Yeah,
I mean, the whole rear wing situation between Mercedes and Red Bull. I mean, that's been the main talking point recently. How flexible is too flexible? How movementy is too movementy? Is 85 millimeters really 85 millimeters? And what are the scorch marks?
Well, I mean, in the past week, I've written my first season review, and I sort of sat down and noted all of the kind of the technical issues that have cropped up through the year. And of course, they're all Mercedes versus Red Bull, Red Bull versus Mercedes. And, all this flexing wing goes back to really quite early in the year when Mercedes complained about Red Bull's overtly flexing rear wing. Red Bull complained about Mercedes over flexing front wing. The FIA did something about one, but not the other. And then, it's just kind of to and fro in lots of ways. And we saw the suspension back in Turkey, wasn't it? That was, again, this very non-linear behavior. And now it's gone back to the rear wings again. We had the DRS issue where Hamilton obviously had his qualifying time disqualified because it was 85.2 millimeters with a 10 Newton meter push through the rear wing. That's quite interesting, actually. because in lots of respects, it's completely irrelevant to what has really been going on between these two teams, in terms of their, the backbiting, and also in terms of what their design teams have been trying to do with the cars. And in some respects, Hamilton being disqualified was, you're a jewel thief, but you get arrested because you've got a stolen Mars bar in your back pocket and not packets of diamonds. So that really is kind of, just one of those weird things that sometimes happens. The reason the wing was tested in the first place is because Red Bull had already gone to the FIA and to the scrutineers and Joe Bauer and said, we think Mercedes is doing something very unusual with their rear wing. We'd like it looked into or clarified for us, which is the way these things work about. And if you remember, after Red Bull's flexing rear wing, they changed the regulations on how they pull the flap at the back of the rear wing down to see that it's not too flexible. So what Mercedes couldn't do if they were trying to do something clever with their rear wing, and I'm not saying they are or they're not, I'm being quite clear on that one. I've seen some evidence and I've heard some more informed rumours than perhaps social media has provided us with. But, I can't say categorically one way or the other. What Red Bull believe is that Mercedes aren't flexing the flap or the entire wing, but just that main plane, the biggest piece of the wing that sort of sits towards the front. And it's the trailing edge of that creates what's known as the slot gap between these two pieces of wing. And that has to be between 10 and 15 millimeters. Now, if you play about with that size, either opening it up or even closing it up, you can stall the rear wing, which just loses a whole heap of drag on the straights and therefore gives you more top speed. So you've probably all seen some of these videos that are going around, and I don't really want to sort of comment on it, but they do suggest where the problem is. And the scorch marks, scratch marks, wherever it was pronounced at the press conference, what that was is where the trailing edge of the rear wing is moving, it looks like it's been scratching the surface. Now, the pictures I've seen don't tally with what I know about the setup, or what I believe to be the setup on the car. So I think it's race fans have had some pictures that have obviously been stolen by everybody. But there is something going on at the back of the wing there, as far as all the evidence is sort of starting to stack up. Now, the FI introduced a new test. Now, they do test the back of the rear, the main plane of the rear wing, and they force it, if I've got this direction right, they force it down with a force of just 20 kilograms, which is a significant amount of weight if you'd imagine that's bottles of water. But in terms of a rear wing, it's a very small amount of force relative to what it actually sees when it's on track. Now they've added an extra test where they pull it backwards as well, which is, I believe, where the clever tricks are coming in. And to be clear, Mercedes weren't running the wing that everyone was pointing the finger at back in Qatar. So the fact that they passed at the end of the Grand Prix all of these tests, or whether it was in Parc Fermé, I'm not quite sure, is kind of irrelevant. If they bring that wing back, Red Bull are going to protest it, and it's all going to get really nasty really quickly. And if the wing does or doesn't fail the test, then we've got debates either direction, whether it's right that teams are constantly protesting, or whether it's right that teams are flexing wings to get an aerodynamic advantage. I think overall, whatever comes out, I don't believe flexing wings is innovation or what should be included in Formula One. If we want wings to start moving about, which is what they're suggesting to do for the 2026 regs, then let's do it properly. Let's not do it with these kind of subversive ways of flexing and moving wings on rubber mounts and springs and bits and pieces. I think that's all wrong. It has been since the mid-90s when teams first started playing about with this kind of area. So, yeah, I think it's right that it gets clamped down on. It's just a shame that it's kind of blighted the year, and it could equally blight the run into the end of the championship this year as well.
Now, it's interesting you say about the tests on the main plane. I think it was the Red Bull wing that when the DRS was open at full speed, there seemed to be a lot of flexing on the top plane when it was open on there. This what they call fluttering is what we saw over the past couple of Grand Prix, and is really kind of certainly ruined Verstappen's weekend
in Qatar because he couldn't run that wing in the race. He ended up running a higher downforce wing, and that certainly blighted his performance in the race. So what that is, that's something slightly different to the flexing that we're talking about with Mercedes or with Red Bull earlier in the year, or indeed with the DRS gap that came up in Brazil, wasn't it? What's happening with the Red Bull rear wing is when DRS opens, you've got the airflow still trying to close that flap down, and the weight of that flap is trying to close that flap down, while the hydraulics and the lever mechanism in the DRS pod on the back wing is trying to pull it open. Now, all of these are fighting each other. They've got almost like a set of springs trying to pull each other apart. And if you get anything upset in that equilibrium, whether it be bumps or the fact that the hydraulics is pulling too hard or maybe not hard enough, or there's unwanted flexibility, and I'm not talking about this kind of aerodynamic flexibility, but simply mechanical movement in those linkages, it just starts to flap because everything's fighting against each other, and you get this kind of resonance set up. Now, the thing that you need to be clear about is that this isn't something Red Bull have designed it to do. This is unwanted movement. This flapping is actually bad for performance. At best, it does nothing. At worst, it will increase drag when you really don't want drag at all because you've got DRS open. But the other question around this is, well, is their rear wing opening at more than 85 millimeters? And from what I can see, I don't believe it is. And the work that they've been doing is to make sure that it doesn't inadvertently go over 85 millimeters and can't subsequently be tested at over 85 millimeters. But their solution during the weekend at Losail was to unbolt that wing and put on a higher downforce wing that didn't have this resonance issue. So, they may have cured it when we get to Saudi in a week's time, or it may, be there again. But it's one of those aggravating things for Red Bull, and it's a little bit awkward because they're throwing around lots of accusations about rear wings of their rivals. But I don't think there's anything sinister in what we were seeing on the flapping rear wing for the last couple of races.
It'd be pretty brave of Red Bull, wouldn't it, if they had some sort of trick of their own they were trying to do while accusing Mercedes of something.
Well, teams have done that in the past. But I don't think it's a good idea to cheat by having something that's visibly flapping at 200 miles an hour, because it gives the game away.
Yeah, and obviously giving the game away is probably the last thing that any team wants to do when they're trying to steal a march on the rivals. Absolutely, and
at the moment the game is very finely balanced as we go into these final two races, isn't it? It's absolutely on a knife edge.
Oh, we've not had a championship like this for ages, where it's been that close coming up to the end of the season that we still don't know who's going to win. Mainly because Lewis Hamilton keeps winning championships in Mexico.
Yeah, that is rather dull for us fans, but I think it's not just that we're going to the last race, but it's also because it's between two very different teams, two very different drivers, lots of different circuits, brand new circuits, modified circuits being thrown at us, and it's just completely unpredictable, which is just making it absolutely so fascinating for everyone. And I think Formula One has been on a bit of a buzz over the past few years, and you can put it a bit down to this drive to survive sort of phenomenon. But certainly, I think Formula One seems to be grabbing more headlines than it has done for quite some time, and I think that's great for the sport and just shows that we are putting on a bit of a performance at the moment.
I think what makes this different with Lewis and Max is because we've seen sort of tight championships before, and championships that go down to the last race. But I can't remember watching a championship where the two title contenders in two different cars were together so much, together next to each other on the grid. Sometimes even when they've had a bad qualifying, they've been next to each other. Then to have your two main championship rivals going out together pretty much every weekend and fighting for victories is great.
Yeah, it's almost unheard of. Often you would get a three-way fight because one car maybe is better and you're getting both drivers. But Hamilton and Verstappen have been, head and shoulders above everybody else all year, and they've been because they're head and shoulders, they're neck and neck. I can throw loads of metaphors at you on this one. And, I mean, I think the car packages are almost, I mean, you can't pick them apart. And, the teams are at different stages of development on the chassis, on the power unit, on their understanding of the tyres. And that's to and fro, but not by any great margin at any point in the year. And, I think it will be sad in a couple of weeks that someone is going to be described as the loser. It doesn't seem to kind of fit with the the performance we've had all year, because people are going to say who had the better car, and I don't think you can say there is a better car between them throughout the year. If you look at it all on balance, they literally are absolutely equal.
Yeah, because it has seemed this year that, like we were talking about before we started, that circuits where you'd expect the Mercedes to be the dominant car hasn't been, and likewise with Red Bull. So I mean that just shows how absolutely close they are.
It's become very difficult to predict. I did one of these Twitter shout-outs, whatever they're called now, and was put on the spot with about 6 races to go. It's like, which one's a Red Bull tracks, which one's a Mercedes? And I've pretty much got it the opposite every time so far. Because, when you think of a high-speed track, had been thinking about it being Red Bull. When you were thinking about high-temperature track, you think, well, that's much more into Mercedes' hands, and it just hasn't shaken out that way. And that's great, because I've got no idea what's going to happen in Saudi or in Yas Marina over the next 2 races. So, it's a classic case of anything could happen.
That feels like one of those tweets you probably should have deleted and just never mentioned again. Yes, I'm sure someone will go back and record that again. But you said it has not happened so far, and I'm traditionally very bad at predicting anything in Formula One when it comes to performance and results. But I mean, I think this year, I think we can just say that we've just had an absolutely vintage year between these 2 drivers, these 2 cars, and 2 team principals as well, who've entertained us endlessly.
They do make for good TV. I will definitely give them that. Drive to Survive next year. It just needs a whole episode on the Toto and Horner argument. Actually, you could probably get a whole series out of it.
I was going to say there could be a whole series on Complain to Survive. Could be the way to do it, something like that, and then just have 6 hours of footage of each of them complaining about each other. But meanwhile, the 2 drivers pat each other on the back when they get out of the car after the Grand Prix, and haven't really said a particularly bad word about each other all year, really, which is kind of nice, because I think drivers traditionally are much worse at kind of doing all of that pre-match boxing kind of bad mouthing each other. And this year it's been a lot more respectful, which I've really quite enjoyed.
Yeah, we're not getting the arguments in the media pen of old. Of course, the classic K-Mag and Hulk suck my balls. That was
no, we don't want any more. We don't want any more of that. Definitely not. No.
Right, we'll do our sort of look back on the last race with a little bit of a difference. We'll go sort of last to first, but Craig, if this is all right with you, we'll sort of talk about the cars and where they've been this year.
Okay.
So we'll start off with Haas, Schumacher 16th and Mazepin 18th. In a car that they said they weren't going to develop, and it looks like they've kept to the word, would you say?
They have absolutely kept to their word. I mean, that car is barely changed from 2020, let alone from the early season. And, it kind of goes against the grain for me that, teams should be developing their car throughout the year. But you have to kind of tip your hat to them that they've had the will to actually say, look, we're just not going to do anything. And, that's been really tough for the 2 rookie drivers The car has been awful. It's got a propensity to throw its rear end off the circuit if anything happens going in on the way into a corner, and it's made life very difficult. Obviously, Mazepin, he had a really tough weekend this weekend at Losail because he went off, damaged his monocoque, and that was his good monocoque, and he's had to go back to his old one, which was the bad one that he said wasn't working so well for him. So, and then they're not going to build a new one at this stage of the year. So, yeah, it's been a really tough year. I think Nikita's had a really bad press from everybody. He's had a tough year with the car. On the other hand, I don't think Mick has shone in the way that perhaps some of us may have expected. You could say that he is, certainly beaten Mazepin hands down, but it's not been any level of domination, and there hasn't been those moments of wow, incredible driving that I think some of us were maybe secretly willing him to have. Last weekend was a kind of a classic example, really. It's just kind of whatever can go wrong goes wrong. And, the best you end up with is 16th when there was a few retirements. It's, really disappointing, but fingers crossed for Haas 2022. And, this year, almost 2 years of development celibacy, call it that. They've abstained so much in the past 2 years. Let's just hope it really does pay off for them in 2022, or else, they're going to must be looking at each other after a few races next year, thinking, "What if we do?" Fingers crossed.
Thinking that.
Yes, yeah. Hat tip to Gene Haas for even competing into this season. But if it doesn't go well at the start of next season, then I think he'll be phoning around the major car manufacturers in Germany to see if they want to pick up on an F1 operation that can be just bought.
Or chemical and fertilizer firms in Russia, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they're the ones that are kind of bankrolling it at the moment. But yes, it's been very difficult, and it's kind of hard to be too tough on them in terms of the performance they've had last weekend or the past 20 weekends that we've had with that car.
Yeah, it's just been everyone said at the start of the year they were going to struggle, and I'm being generous to Schumacher and saying the jury's out. Let's see what he can do in a car that's even semi-competitive, rather than just turning up to get the appearance money.
Yeah, or at least just a car that isn't trying to kill you every time you go towards a corner. That's just been so difficult for them. But let's wait and see. I've got some cautious optimism. Haas are another one of those teams that are in the list of they're going to do really well next year, along with the other 9 teams that are also going to do very well next year.
Mazepin's development on his car has gone backwards again, hasn't it? Because he's back to using the car which they said was heavier in the first place.
Exactly, yeah. His next 2 races are going to be probably quite horrible because I can't see them physically being able to repair that tub between now and the next race or the final race, nor would they probably want to put that money and effort in. It's just like, no, that one would just get turned into a show car or some kind of extravagant gaming setup, and that would be the end of it.
Now I'm just wondering if I could get that in the spare room. No, probably. The thing is, Sean wouldn't kill me for it. She'd be all for it. I can say I can say this while she's not in the room.
Go and check the bins at Banbury and see what they're throwing out.
Right, next up, we have Williams, George Russell in 17th, and Latifi retired. Victims of the left punctures, both of them.
Yes, when Pirelli say that all of the quickest ways to run the race are 2-stoppers, and that you should be really careful with the mileage for fear of wearing these tyres out on what is a high tyre a high energy circuit, high tyre attrition circuit, and then you go and try and do one stops or long stints. The inevitable happens, doesn't it? Especially if you're pushing hard, you use the curbs, you're going to get blowouts. Williams suffered with that, and Williams seem to have kind of taken a dive, haven't they, in this kind of last third of the season? They're not kind of shining as they were early season, mid season, and you kind of wonder where the shine has kind of gone off that, because I don't think the teams that they're fighting against are have picked up their pace or development curve at all. They're on the same kind of decline as everybody in terms of they're not doing anything to the cars. So I thought Williams' lack of performance in the past few races is a little bit disturbing in some respects. It's like, why would that be happening? Why aren't they, getting closer and closer to that midfield rather than starting to drift back away from it?
I mean, could it be that the pretty much guaranteed 8th place in the Constructors, and the two teams below don't have a hope in hell of catching them? So just concentrate fully on next year's car now, and this year's car's done its work, and effectively it's on its farewell tour.
Yeah, I see your point, but what you have is all the work on next year's car is being done by the design office and the aero team, and they haven't been involved in this year's car for Williams since their big update, which was Baku time. I think was the last time we saw big updates. Might have been something Russia. I can't quite remember now. The people that have been running the car all year and continue to run it are the race engineering team. And while they will have influence and be looking at the sim and everything for next year, their attention really isn't dragged into 2022 yet until the season's really over. Their job is to get most out of this car. And once they kind of got to that fairly comfortable position mid-season that they were clearly 8th, then why not? I think they were making noises, weren't they, about, well, now we've got that done. We've got podium, we've got 8th secure, we can go and take some risks. And you're not seeing that. If anything, they're kind of going backwards and playing it safe and not making those kind of moves. So, yeah, it's a bit confusing that, that they aren't able to drag a bit more performance out of there and kind of hustle the teams in front and try and grab some headlines by doing something quite aggressive. And I don't think running super long stints in a 2-stop race is the right sort of aggressive. So, yeah, I really would like to be a fly on the wall at Williams and understand what's happening there at the moment.
I mean, it's a confusing time at Williams anyway, because I mean it's the first full year of the Doralton ownership.
Mm-hmm.
And they're still sort of dealing with the legacy of what is 95% of last year's car, which was a brick, effectively. With no,
yes,
which they weren't able to develop because they didn't have the funds or probably the staff at most of the points, and maybe they run out of lipstick to put on the pig now, and they're just sort of given up on this year because they've done better than was expected.
Yeah, again, it's it's split between design and operation of the car, and yeah, I mean, I wasn't expecting Williams to add any bits to the car, and they certainly did improve the car quite surprisingly a large amount over the winter just by sorting the aero out and getting a bit more downforce on the car. I know the car's a lot more sensitive, and I think that's why we have seen so much qualifying highlights, but maybe less so in the race. Because obviously in the race they're certainly in amongst the midfield, and I don't think the car works when it's surrounded by lots of cars. Certainly first laps for Williams are generally very poor. Again, that's when the traffic and the turbulence is at its worst. So yeah, I mean, again, I think Williams could have, with strategy and some engineering, got more out of the car, or at least maintained the gap to the rest of the midfield. But I sort of keep going back to, I think they're kind of slipping away from it rather than getting closer.
I guess we'll see how this all pans out, and we keep saying this again next year. New cars, new regs, partially new lineup.
Driver for Williams.
Yeah.
You've got Albon, haven't they?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, and equally, it will be the first year that the technical team have really kind of bedded in. So, FX de Maison with Salvers, Julie Ramph, really kind of getting to grips with the team. And I think the other sort of, the kind of key thing there is that, I mean, we've spoken about this many, many times over the years when we've spoken about Williams, is it's a team that really needs to kind of modernise and get its act together. And it's a team that's changing rapidly. And it'll be interesting to see how much of that has matured ready for next year. How much has been going on back at the factory at Grove, in terms of, getting these departments sorted out, getting the processes and procedures and the ways that they work and set targets all sorted out. I think that's, it's almost as big a challenge for Williams to get that done for next year as adapting, for these regulations. So, they've got a lot to get done, but I think this year has given us a little optimism that they may be starting down that path, even if it has fizzled out a little bit as we've gone through the year.
I think it's good for them getting Albon on board too, because it must have been, unless these deals were all sort of done like well in advance to what we heard, it must have been a little bit of a knock to the team losing Russell, because you kind of knew he was going to go somewhere else. But with him being able to get these results out of a car which probably shouldn't be getting them, if Williams would have gone then back to having, another driver that was maybe past the sell-by date or another pay driver in, it would have felt like another step backwards. But Albon feels like, someone that deserves to be on the grid and that's got to prove himself. So I think he'll be going just as hard as George Russell was to prove himself as well.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. Absolutely, a good point. Well made. I completely agree. It's good to see Albon back, and hopefully in a car that's a bit easier to handle than the Red Bull was during his limited tenure there.
But we all know that second Red Bull is impossible to drive, allegedly.
Well, yeah, on most weekends at least.
Pardon me. Right, next up we have Alfa Romeo. Talking of teams that will be fielding new drivers next year, completely changed lineup. Now that Guan Yu Zhou's been announced as replacing Giovinazzi, I mean that's come about because Ferrari don't have to nominate, don't have control of one of the seats anymore, and Guan Yu Zhou's got a hell of a lot of backing, and the Sauber operation have always been. How best to put it? Grateful for any funding that's brought in. How about that?
That's a very, very nice way of putting it. Yeah. Cash strapped.
Yeah,
is maybe the more English term, but yes, I completely agree with you. Yeah, no, they've always struggled for funding, even within this budget cap. It's always been an issue for the team based out of Hinwil there, effectively the Sauber team. So I mean, I think the driver lineup is going to be interesting. I don't know much about Guang. I've spoken to lots of Chinese journalists in the past, and they never kind of rated him as the ideal guy to go ahead. And obviously, then you're in that second seat. You have a guy that's been a little bit reborn in recent months, but he's going from one of the best cars on the grid. If not for the past few years, certainly the best car in previous years, to what's going to be quite a challenge. And Alfa Romeo haven't really shown themselves to have a great car this year. They didn't do a lot to it, in fairness. Haven't done a lot to it through the year either. And I think it really has just been down to some kind of fantastic bouts of driving at the right moment for both the drivers at different points in this year, actually, in fairness. Giovinazzi's had some great sort of moments on track, and so has Kimi, which has always been quite fun to watch. But you can kind of bag Alfa Romeo up as, again, another one of those teams that maybe really focused on 2022. Therefore, they're going to have a great 2022, which is, the cliche that we're all going to be pulling out. I'm maybe less optimistic that they have got the potential to really pull something spectacular out, and I think rather sadly that they may be a bit further towards the back of the grid next year as they are this year.
Yeah, I mean it's been a bit of a non-year for them, the way that I've seen, because like you said, the car doesn't seem to have come on a great deal. And
No.
I think that, both drivers have been struggling with it at various points of the season. And again, I mean, Lee, you've never been Giovinazzi's biggest fan, have you? Let's be honest.
He's just he never seems to me like he really fitted. He seems like a driver that maybe should have drifted in and out of Formula One quite quickly. He feels like he's outstayed his welcome.
I mean, this is the end of his third season with the team. Second season. You see, this is how much he sort of shows up on the radar. This is why for every race we have the Antonio Giovinazzi Participation Award for drivers that were apparently there.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could say that about the entire Alfa Romeo team. Unfortunately, over the past few years, they're a little bit like Williams. They did work over the winter again with a new technical head at Jan Monchot, who came from Toyota in their WEC team. So and previously in Formula One as well. And yeah, I mean, you can see how they made improvements, and you can see that there's the potential in the background for them to improve. I think the fact that they were trying to sell out to Penske through the year maybe suggests that things aren't as great there as maybe we'd love to believe. So I think they've had maybe a better year than I predicted, and I think at least part of that is the improved Ferrari power unit. A little bit from the improved aero that they had, but not by a huge amount. So yeah, this year they really have been quite anonymous, and it's quite easy to kind of forget them when you run through the list of teams that are participating, and the fact that they are ahead of Haas, it's not a lot to shout about, really, is it? Not really.
No, not massively. I mean, going back to when we first started doing this in 2015, we used to call them Anonymous Sauber every week.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of their, in terms of positional results, was actually obtained by Kubica, wasn't it? I think he ended up having more results than Haas have had, which is rather peculiar in a year like this year with the pandemic and Kimi being off. But I mean, I think it's a year to forget for the back end of the grid this year. I think all of these three teams really just want to kind of write it off and look forward to next year. But, you do have to wonder how much they can truly jump from their position where they're at the moment. They've got a lot to do with some teams that are really on top of their game in terms of understanding the cars, understanding how to develop quickly. So I think even if any of these three teams came up with something really cool and found some performance, I think it would very soon be eradicated by the top teams, either copying them or just out developing them in their own areas.
I mean, that's the thing with F1 development. It is so hard to stay ahead of the game consistently, because you will always get caught up. Maybe the budget cap's going to even this out, because it used to be a case of a team comes up with something completely innovative, and usually Ferrari, but one of the other bigger teams, throws an absolute ton of money into doing something even better, because it was something that they maybe hadn't thought of before.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very much the case. The big 3-4 teams could quite quickly, even with the budget cap and the wind tunnel CFD restrictions, catch up in a really short space of time if something really clever does kind of crop up. So, it does kind of sound quite depressing to say it out loud, but that is Formula One. That's where we're at, and this kind of leveling agenda that Formula One is pursuing at the moment is going to take a few years to really kind of cut in when you do get those big teams, really not wanting to, put loads of new parts on the car because they all go into the budget cap. And I think, equally, maybe for some of these bottom three teams this year, they don't want to be put in. Certainly, if any of them had a big crash at Saudi, they wouldn't want to be making lots of new parts to go to Abu Dhabi. And I think we could find some cars in Abu Dhabi with a really odd mix of parts on their cars, of bits that really shouldn't be on there because they're, an older design or higher mileage. It's a slightly odd situation I think we find ourselves in as we come to the first year that we've had this budget cap.
Yeah, you'd be able to tell who's struggling if anyone turns up on the grid in Abu Dhabi with a Monza front wing and a Monaco rear wing.
Yeah, or maybe last year's painted bodywork. I don't know if that's even legal, but yeah, I mean, I think Williams could bring last year's wing, but perceivably quite easily to it's like, oh, we'll sticker it later. It doesn't matter.
Right, AlphaTauri next. Tsunoda in 13th and Gasly in 11th. Gasly was running well, but then had the puncture. AlphaTauri have come on in leaps and bounds this year with that car.
Yeah, I mean, I think we saw a little bit last year. They're going much more into a Haas-style listed parts approach, where they're getting more and more from Red Bull Technology, the overarching company between both the teams. And it's strange, isn't it? Because what they did this year is they kept very much most of their front suspension, but changed the steering rack, which is Red Bull's very clever rearward mounted steering rack. That gives you lots of very clever ways of playing with Ackerman and stuff like that. But they also took the 2020 Red Bull rear suspension, and that was the one thing that made the Red Bull really hard to drive last year, and was what Red Bull spent their tokens on. But AlphaTauri seemed to have taken on this rear suspension, and that car really works with it. You certainly couldn't call the AlphaTauri a difficult car to drive, because it just seems to be able to find lap times quite easily. But I think the conundrum that we've seen with AlphaTauri this year is that there seems to have been huge amounts of potential there with, Gasly's clearly driving, you must rate him as one of the best drivers on the grid at the moment. Tsunoda, certainly got some time out of the car earlier this year. I think he's had to sort of calm it down, and maybe that curve of his is coming back up. But somehow AlphaTauri as a team, as a race operation, just can't get a weekend together, can they? If you see them, they look good in qualifying, then they have a dreadful race. If they, have a bad qualifying, then they tend to have a good race, and, sometimes little bits of each other, and they seem to gather lots of penalties and lots of reliability problems, and they just never seem to get everything hooked up all over one weekend. And Qatar is a classic example, wasn't it? Gasly, was on fire, and he came off of the back of Brazil as best of the rest. And where was he in the race? It's like, where did he go?
He was
just kind of just drifted back.
He was sort of lamenting the pace of the car, wasn't he, in the pit afterwards? Yeah. I think.
Yeah, it's just it is a little bit like the Williams race engineer operation. At what point does somebody at AlphaTauri go, do you know what? We could be doing so much better if we got our act together. Now, whose job is it to get our act together? Let's either get them organised, kick them out, and get someone in that can do it. But you don't get that sensation that there's anyone's heads on the line here at AlphaTauri, and they really are underperforming with what their potential could be. And I just find that really weird. And, it's been the case all year long, really. I mean, after the first few races, when we saw that car did have a bit of pace in itself. But, is it Franz Tost that's the problem with someone else?
But Helmut Marko only fires drivers.
Well, yeah, again, Helmut Marko only hires drivers, but I'm pretty sure Dieter Mateschitz is paying for results. And, surely he's got to start banging on the desk and going, why the hell aren't these people, fighting with Ferrari and McLaren in the championship? Because they're not, they're nowhere near it. They're in with Alpine at the moment. And, why aren't these results coming? Why are we always on the back foot, at least through one part of the weekend? And, it really should be a case that head should roll and let's get some other people into those jobs, because whatever they're doing at the moment isn't working.
Do you think they're missing James Key?
That's an interesting point. I would say I don't think so, because I think inherently the cars are very good. The design of the car is really, it's got performance in it, and I think that's something James Key was very good at bringing, a very consistent performance. And I think in terms of, if you take their peaks, they are consistently potentially very fast. I think what they're missing is something more in the sporting management. race operation. That, you know, why are we always on the wrong track and we get a bad qualifier? Why are we always having unreliability problems? Why are we always getting penalties? You know, that's not. It's partly down to the technical director, but I don't think James Key would necessarily be able to fix all the problems that they had if he could come back. I think I'm not quite sure that what the management are at Alpha Tour. It's not my strong point, but yeah, I mean, I think you know, the sporting manager or Franz Dost or something needs to get sorted there, or else they really are just kind of throwing money away and letting other teams, you know, get the TV time when it should be their t-shirts getting the airtime.
It is strange, isn't it? I've always thought this with Toro Rosso now, AlphaTauri. When you look at where Red Bull are, you just think to yourself, well, why aren't them just behind Red Bull? You know, I know there's only so much they can legally swap between teams, but I mean, let's be honest, there's obviously information that goes back and forwards from those teams that maybe shouldn't do. But yeah, I just don't understand it.
Yeah, you know, and you would have thought Red Bull would want to do something, but we'll see. But you know, going into next year, they'll probably take all of the 2022 listed parts from Red Bull. Will be very much a kind of a red Haas setup there, which again, you know, bodes really well. They should have a really strong year in 2022. And you know, I mean, I don't think that the Honda engine is going to slip, have its crown slip in 2022 either. So you know, there's every reason that they should be hassling Ferrari and McLaren at the very least, and if not, you know, maybe being in front of them. But for whatever it is, you know, it's not happening.
We'll move on to McLaren next. Danny Rick was 12th and Lando was 9th. A lot of questions before the race about have McLaren been bought by Audi, which, as it turned out, no.
There was some very careful wording in some of those announcements, wasn't there?
Yes.
There was a lot more that wasn't said than was said. I think there is still potential there. You know, McLaren being a effectively customer team to Mercedes engine can't be a strong position for them. Looking forwards, if you look at all of the people that McLaren have put in there under Andrea Seidel, there is a Germanic flavour going on there. It wouldn't surprise me if there is possibly a kind of a low-key partnership to kick things off. And much like Audi did in Formula E with the what was it, the ABS team, wasn't it? It was named there.
Yeah.
So I think something could happen there. But that's still a little way off. But I wouldn't be surprised if we did hear something bubbling up over the next few years as we get towards those next engine regulations in a couple of years' time. So keep an eye on that. But McLaren really have blossomed this year. I mean, it's been, you know, after all these years, we were kind of talking through the early Honda years and saying how terrible it is that McLaren are on the back row and are just nowhere to being in a position where they've won a race in pretty fair conditions, I think. You know, maybe a little bit fortuitous, but, you know that's what you need sometimes, a little bit. But really, they, you know, certainly for the first 2/3 of the year, they have been the best of the rest. And, you know, despite Ricciardo taking his time to kind of get to know the car, I think he's kind of a lot more on top of it now in the past handful of races than he had been early this year. I think that's cost them in the Constructors' Championship, sadly. And, yeah, I mean, again, it bodes so well for them that they just seem to be really on top of every aspect of their game. And they just need a kind of a little bit in every area to make that big step to being, you know, regular podium finishers and giving Mercedes and Red Bull some hassle.
Definitely. I mean, the thing that's surprised me the most this season is McLaren, with 2 races left, are still the only team to have a 1-2.
Yeah, strange, isn't it? It's kind of, how does How does that work? But yeah. But then again, I suppose when you look at what we were saying earlier, that it's been very much a Max versus Lewis championship, very much an A driver versus wingman driver. Probably explains why that's been the case. And it was very much a weekend where the A drivers looked after themselves and the B drivers just weren't really in the running. So, yeah, fair play to McLaren. They'd had a few good weekends. But certainly, I think, since then, sadly, for McLaren at least, is Ferrari have kind of come on and are kind of racking the points up a little bit at the moment. Even if maybe I think they did underperform a little bit in Qatar.
Yeah, just looking at it, since McLaren got the 1-2, they've been kind of anonymously mid to low points, and they've only had one double points finish since then. Whereas Ferrari have only missed out on the points with one car in one race.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm having to look this up. If we had Virtual Statman on call, they'd have been able to sort of spin that off within seconds.
I think I know there is a stat that they've got about 40 more points than McLaren in the last batch of races or something like that. I can never remember figures like that. But Ferrari certainly have been at the top of their game with kind of Gasly, getting in amongst them a little bit, and Alonso last weekend. It's strange. I know Losail was a difficult weekend for them. They did have better pace in qualifying, but Danny Rick had his fuel meter problems that kind of scuppered his race. And again, there was the tyre issues for Norris as well. So, they kind of lost out what could potentially have been a much better weekend for them. But, I think the run of form is certainly against them when you compare them to Ferrari at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, McLaren seem to be one of those teams that have binary weeks. What one driver does well, the other has a meh. I mean, it's mainly been Lando having the good week and Danny having the bad one, but there's been more weeks than not where it's just been all one driver.
Yeah, that's the case, and they also seem to really struggle to get up to speed over Friday. And quite often when I look at the times at the end of a session on a Friday, and you think, right, where are the McLarens? Where going down? Oh God, they're down there. Kind of banging around the sort of just above the top 10th or the just under the top 10. And you think, we thought they'd do. Obviously, they bounced back much better through FP3 and quali, and obviously therefore the race. But it's a shame because I think certainly from when you look on balance, you thought for McLaren could have kept P3 this year for the second year running, which would have been fantastic for them. But it's now looking maybe less likely that they'll do that, and Ferrari will kind of get their bounce back after their bad year last year.
Yeah, it is a shame because, like I said before, I think if Ricciardo could have got on board a little bit quicker, they'd have probably already cemented enough points to have kept that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think certainly, because we tend to look to the constructors when you're talking about the team, aren't we? So, Danny did really struggle just getting to understand how this car rotated through corners. And how he could get his driving style to work with it. But and I still think he's a little bit up and down depending on the circuit and the tyres. But he's has improved. And from what he's been saying is that he is gelling very well with the 2022 car at the moment in the simulator. So again, that gives us some hopes that there will be a properly competitive two-car team throughout 22 with them.
If the 2022 car's good in the sim, I'm going to have to get on R Factor 2 when they release it for that. Apparently, R Factor 2 is based on the software that a lot of teams use for their sims. So I know nothing.
Yeah.
I know nothing. I'm crap at sim racing. Doesn't stop me.
Yes.
Doesn't stop me doing it, but I'm not any good at it.
No. Yeah, know your limitations.
Yeah, and there's probably about 15, 20 people that are all in three legs, four wheels iRacing League going, yeah, nice of you to finally admit it. Let's see, where are we going to be next? We'll do Aston Martin next. Vettel in 10th and Lance Stroll in 6th after one of his usual, oh my God, he's not really good at qualifying performances.
Yeah, it's a bit of it's kind of classic Aston Martin, the Racing Point, Force India, ... weekends where, they just got the strategy right, didn't they? Stroll really had a strong result, and he's got his new race engineer, Ben Michel, and that seems to be working really well. I mean, the driver's relationship with their race engineer is, a real key part of their performance, and that seems to be, kind of coming on for him quite nicely. And throughout the year, Stroll puts in some really good performances. He is quite inconsistent, but he does have highs. He's not someone that is just always at the same level. Sometimes he flies, sometimes he doesn't appear to. Equally with Vettel. Very strong in his races this year, and seems to work very well with the Aston Martin way of doing things in terms of being really clever with strategy and tyre management. And I think that's really kind of rejuvenated Vettel this year, because I think we was all a bit worried about him over the past few years, weren't we? Thinking that he had kind of burnt out and lost his love for Formula One, and this year he's kind of coming back. With a skip in his step, with some pace, and taking up a position as kind of the elder statesman of Formula One. And, I think that's been really nice, and glad that all of our sort of negativity about him has been kind of reversed over the past few years. Meanwhile, Aston Martin, they've had a really difficult year. They, had their weird year with Copygate last year. They've had to kind of adapt a car that they didn't really understand last year into a new car, which must have been a far bigger task for Aston Martin than anyone else. Plus the regulations, if we believe them, were worded against the low rake, long wheelbase cars. Still a little bit jury out on that one, but certainly performance was hurt over the winter, and they seem to kind of seem to be happy to get to a certain level of performance, and then they just cut off this year, didn't they, in terms of development. And they're building that new factory, which I drove around the back of yesterday. Is looking absolutely amazing. You've got all that money flowing in. You've got the budget cap. Things are looking really strong for them, even if the balance of this year, maybe hasn't been as great as they would have liked it to be. But I'm really optimistic, probably more so than most of the other teams that are all optimistic in themselves. I think Aston Martin are the team that will honestly make a step next year from this year's performance, and maybe that just means that they end up back where they have been, which is kind of 4th, 5th in the championship, maybe up to 3rd if they have a really strong year. But I think we should see them back to their old kind of Force India days in 2022, and I think that's really where they deserve to be.
Yeah, I mean, when Stroll came in, he said he wants to be winning races and championships. And everyone laughed at him and was like, yeah, right, okay, how much are you going to throw into this team? He does appear to be putting the money behind it and using it as a hobby. Not using it as a hobby, I should say.
Well, I suppose the good thing is that we know that they have to find at least 140 million a year in US dollars, because that's the budget cap. And then obviously, there's ways that they play about with the capital investment into the factory and all of the facilities there. So I'm not quite sure how that all works out. But Stroll Senior, I listened to the Formula One podcast where he was talking, and you can see that he's treating this as his kind of big gig at the moment. And he's finding the money from somewhere, whether it's his pocket or other people's, I don't know. But he seems to be. He's got his head screwed on how he's approaching this. He simply can't throw money at it. And even today, the announcement of more important people being hired into the team to run it going forwards, they seem to be hiring some fairly clever signings. It's not just big names, big headline names. But the people that are actually been doing the work behind the scenes at the other teams. So, kind of the unsung heroes, but the ones that really get the work done. So, yeah, I mean, as I say, it really does look like there is a bit of strategy going on there. And it's quite unusual in Formula One for someone to have lots of money and a good approach to where that money goes. So, real fingers crossed for the team because it should be good for them.
Yeah, we'll get onto Ferrari shortly, talking about not knowing how to spend the money you've got.
Mm.
I mean, the big story around Aston Martin sort of recently over the last week was is Otmar Schaffnauer on his way out? Is he going to Alpine? And various parts of the press have already decided that Martin Whitmarsh is taking over from him. And it just seems odd.
I don't think Whitmarsh is in the position to take over Schaffnauer's job in terms of what Whitmarsh should be focusing on, which is the Aston Martin group, which I think he's much better suited to than maybe judging him from his time at McLaren, which is all he's really kind of got to go on. I don't think he's necessarily an ideal team principal or sporting manager for a team. I've heard lots of rumours, both the stuff that's been in the press recently and obviously whispers throughout the year that Schaffnauer could be on his way out there, which is strange because he's kind of the one that's been pulling all the strings to get this all happening in the first place. And it would be strange that somehow he's shoved out of something that's of his own making. Maybe there isn't somewhere upwards he can move into or some sideways he can move into. But it would be interesting who they put in there. And again, as much as they've been hiring some very good people, there's always that fear that they messed up the recipe of the secret sauce that team have had for so many years, because so many people in that team have been there for so long and have really got how to go racing worked out that you don't want to kind of mess up the balance of that too much by shifting people about. So we just have to kind of keep an eye on that side of things. But I think there are more hirings and firings to happen there at that team over the coming months.
There's going to be a lot to keep an eye on over the winter. We thought we were going to get a nice quiet winter break. It's not going to happen, is it?
Well, I knew I wasn't going to get a quiet winter. I know I'm not quite sure what you were expecting, but it's there's quite a melting pot going on at the moment, isn't there? It's quite interesting in all different sort of spheres of Formula One, not just obviously my interest on the technical side, but the sporting, political, all the sponsorship and all the deals and the management. There's lots kind of bubbling around.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Yes. Management, deals, sponsorship, and money. Ferrari next. while we're on the politics, 7th for Carlos, 8th for Charles. Another victim of a broken chassis on the curbs, I do believe.
Yes, that came as a bit of a surprise and really did kind of knock back Leclerc's weekend a little bit. His qualifying wasn't great. His race maybe wasn't quite what we would expect of Ferrari based on recent performance. A difficult weekend for them all in all, really. They were looking to have so much a stronger weekend than the result that they eventually got, which for McLaren probably is a good thing. Ferrari really have come on, as I said earlier, a lot stronger in the second half of this year. Certainly when they had that power unit update with the double voltage on the energy recovery system that really has kind of given them that acceleration out of slow corners that really has kind of massively improved their pace, because it's the same chassis underneath it, or certainly not in Charles' case, because that one got swapped out. But all the aero and everything else bolted to it was the same they've had for most people for many races now. So it's all down to the power unit, and Ferrari seem to be generally a fairly cohesive, well-organised team at the moment. They don't seem to be making too many mistakes. I mean, I think we were maybe a bit more judgmental of them earlier this year. But what I have noticed is that the drivers seem to be increasingly inconsistent between themselves. Maybe a little bit like you were sort of saying with the McLaren team. Sometimes you'll see Charles have an incredible qualifying or an incredible race, but rarely the sort of the two together. And rarely would be Carlos having, a stellar weekend overall. I mean, I'm finding Charles increasingly more inconsistent than Carlos is, which is maybe not what you would have expected going into the season. Certainly, Carlos has really settled very well into the way of Ferrari working. It's really working out very well for however he's tackling his season. So, you wonder whether Ferrari will break out into more kind of peace and unity next year, or break down into different groups facing off against each other. It's
Ferrari. It's Ferrari.
Tricky.
It could go either way. Yeah.
I mean, I think certainly we've seen the team operating a little bit better as Binotto has been maybe a little bit more hands off over these recent races as team principal, and I think that actually shows that he was spreading himself a bit too thin, being both a technical guy, the head of the team principal, plus all the other kind of, boardroom level things and media level things that the boss of Ferrari needs to kind of cope with. So I think Ferrari do need a few other heads there to kind of bolster the team on the sporting side, and let Binotto do what he's clearly very good at, which is kind of getting that high level organization sorted, rather than him being the person on the ground doing, some of the more hands-on bits of management. So, I think Ferrari have got some areas to improve, but certainly, by and large, they are over. If you look on balance over the year and ignore the championship finishing positions, I think they're pretty equal with McLaren in terms of the car, their operation, the kind of momentum that they've got from the previous years, and makes it very hard to predict where both of them will go in 2022, because clearly both of them have got the potential to sink a huge amount of resource, despite all of the the budget caps and the wind tunnel restrictions. They've got the ability to really put a lot of effort into this new car, because they need to close that gap to Mercedes and Red Bull. I mean, that really has to be their goal. They've really got to make it a 3 or 4-way championship, or 3 or 4-way races every weekend as their goal, because otherwise they're always just going to be at the front of the midfield, rather than being a leading team properly fighting for wins and potentially championships.
Do you think there's enough in the rule change this year for one of the mid-grid teams to actually join Mercedes and Red Bull?
I don't think there is the scope if you look beyond Ferrari and McLaren. I think the only two teams realistically able to make that step. I would say if you kind of look down the grid, AlphaTauri probably unlikely. Alpine maybe would be the one team that could have that potential, but I just still have my doubts in terms of how much commitment you have at Enstone and at Vieri to really make that big jump that's necessary. And I think that's been my criticism of the team for many years. And again, I don't see that. I think it's improved this year, but I don't think they're ready to make a step change. Aston Martin, I think it's maybe a little bit too early for them, and I can't see anyone further down the grid beyond that, really. So, and the chances of both McLaren and Ferrari getting it right and joining the top two, I think at best we could expect maybe one of them to join it. But anything could happen. Who knows? But certainly from what you can see from the form book and everything else, I think we're going to have largely a status quo carried on into next year.
And just like that, the 2022 hopes were dashed.
But of course, that's if you're looking only at the sharp end of the grid. We could end up with maybe Red Bull and Mercedes fighting each other, but we could end up having everything from McLaren, Ferrari down to the Haas's all in one big pack, getting, that third P3, getting into Q3 at different races because they've got the better car on that track on that weekend. It could be a season like that. It's, we've had that in recent years where the midfield's been really strong. I think this year it's unusual. It's been strung out a bit more into maybe 3 groups behind the top 2. So I think it will be a competitive year next year. I just don't think we're going to have, 8 cars vying for the win every race.
It would be nice to see, but if you want that, watch IndyCar.
Yes, exactly.
Right, nosebleed time. Alpine. Ocon in fifth, and Alonso making his first return to the podium in 7 years.
Yeah, I mean, that was quite a performance from them this weekend. You know, they kind of got everything hooked up at the right time without getting penalties and avoiding the pitfalls that everyone else was falling into, and just got some great results, as we saw them do a few times earlier this year as well, obviously with that win and podiums. But hold on, I've got a cough, excuse me. Yeah, and again, that's very much against the form book, wasn't it? You know, Losail wasn't the circuit that Alpine were always going to get that podium in, but they did, and Alonso got that, you know, much awaited and much anticipated podium. And I honestly can't believe that the time that's passed since he was last there. But
this is this is Alonso's first podium since we started doing this podcast.
Yeah,
I'm waiting for Lee to be stunned on that one.
That's crazy.
It's been a good few years, but I think you've seen from some of his race performances all year that we've been kind of waiting for that Alonso moment, and we've got it. I mean, it'd be nice if it was a win. It would have been nice if he was P1 at turn 1, but we'll take P3. That's good. I don't think that this is a new dawn for Alpine, though. I mean, I think their performance this year has been maybe at a higher level than expected, and I think the chassis works a lot better this year than we have seen for the past few years, and I think that's a good thing. I think there has been that increased commitment. The power unit's certainly better this year as well. They're much more on a par with the rest of the top of the midfield, and I think if we'd had a more normal year with development and not concerns for the 2022 regulations, maybe they could have done even better this year with a bit more development in, but they cut off early like many teams did, hoping to get a bit more of a jump into next year. And it will be truly fascinating to see how far they can push into next year. I continue to have my doubts. I'd love to be proven wrong, because there will be nothing greater than seeing Enstone, Alonso and Ocon pushing for podiums and even wins next year. But given the competition, that's a really big ask of them.
It feels like a car of concessions, doesn't it? The Alpine this year. I mean, the aero box and stuff like that, and just it looks like such a hulking mass of a car. That there must be things that were done to that car which we just we just need to do this to get this year out of the way.
I think the car is very counterintuitive when you come to looking at a car and try and work out what makes it look fast, because the things that are right in your face, like the big engine cover, tend to be one of those things that you point at it because it's really obvious. Obviously, that was designed and it gives them performance because it's taking away the side pod volume, which is far more important for getting the diffuser and the floor to work. So I don't think that is, in any sense, one of the reasons for any problems this year. I think they did well to get a far better race car out of the 2020 car, which in lots of ways was still the 2019 car, if we remember. So, to get that level of performance out of a 3-year-old car, I think was still impressive. But the car does lack in aero. It lacks a little bit in the power unit as well. And, it's a bit like for them to catch up to Ferrari and McLaren. It's a little bit like Ferrari and McLaren catching up to Mercedes and Red Bull. They need lots of little bits and lots of little areas, which requires a huge amount of effort. And it's a lot to achieve over a winter. It's possible, but we'll just have to see. Again, it's another one of those teams. The cliche we throw out is, they have the potential to make the biggest jump next year of anybody. I do believe that. So, let's see what testing brings in Barcelona in February.
Is the lack of any customer engine teams causing them any struggles? Because they are the only engine supplier that's just supplying themselves.
I think where we stand now with the way that you can develop the engine, I don't think so. They've got two very good drivers. They've got a very good technical team on board. There's not a lot that they can do on track, and there's not a lot of more feedback that can come from the track and data that can come back from the track that would feed into the development program over at Viry in France, from 4 cars than from 2, I think, at this stage. I think it really is simply, budget being thrown at the engine development program, which has perennially been the weak point in compared to the Mercedes, the Ferrari, and especially the Honda recently. They just haven't had that level of performance. In some respects, having a Custer team could even eat away at the resources, because you'll only get £60 million in through the door from a engine supply to a second team, but the actual cost to deliver those engines and the development through the year and the support through the year way outstrips $16 million or pounds, whatever it is. So it probably may actually be slightly better for them to be a single team on balance. And we're about to go into a long engine freeze. So again, what odds does it make that they're not supplying an extra team? They can just really focus on, what Fernando wants from his engine.
Never thought of it. Never thought of it that way. I was purely thinking, are they losing out on data and track time? But yeah, when you put it that way, that makes perfect sense.
You've got to remember these engines are 8 years old now. There's the development curve, while it's still going up, has flattened off significantly. So I'm sure they know what they could do to the engine if they really had the money and resources to do it. So
yeah, I guess right. So that leaves the top 2 teams, which we usually do all at once, and as it's a complete arms race between the pair of them, probably worth looking at the whole thing. Red Bull came out of this slightly better with 2 cars finishing 4th and 2nd. Hamilton, of course, taking the win, and Bottas was the first DNF. Did they actually say what happened to his car? Because it was just 1 minute he's got a puncture and then he's retiring.
No, I listened to their fantastic YouTube debriefs, which they've done all this year, which I can be critical of both these teams, but I can be critical of Mercedes sometimes. But their social media, and particularly these YouTube debriefs they've been doing, are fantastic and really show the rest of the teams up. But this week they didn't say what was wrong with Bottas's engine. He was carrying a problem throughout the race, long before the tyre problem. And I think basically it just came to the stage where they were that far back. It's like, let's just pull the car in, save the mileage, and see what we could do for the next race. And it's a bit of a shame, really, because I think you had this kind of the wingman battle building up quite nicely through the Grand Prix, just as maybe we're hoping for a tighter battle for the A driver. But Max never really kind of took the fight to Lewis through the race once he kind of got into that P2 position. Perhaps handicapped slightly by that rear wing that he had to run. But I think everyone really kind of got the maximum results out of the cars that they could, given the cars that were dealt to them through the weekend and from the steward's office.
Yeah, I mean, the stewards have been playing a large part in the overall sort of narrative of the Grand Prix weekends recently. And we're getting stories of lack of consistency and when is a penalty not a penalty, and then of course we had the review of the Max onboard footage from Turn 4 in Brazil, and no further action taken on that. And was it the same as what happened with Perez and Norris in Austria?
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge amount of inconsistency, particularly with driving standards, because I think this is still a relatively new way of looking at racing, isn't it? I know it happens in other categories. Certainly, anyone who watches the British Touring Car Championship knows that they've tried to clean it up in that area. It's difficult, and it's difficult because the stewards and race direction can't look at every incident and make a ruling on it because there just simply isn't the time, and it's tricky to do it post race. So they can only kind of look at the headline ones, and it is inconsistent because you've got different people doing it with different pressures at different times. I think the call for some more permanent stewards / referees, umpires, what you want to call them, would be a good thing. I don't know about the practicalities. And equally, I'm not a driver, so when I was looking at the onboard footage of what came out last week of Max's steering wheel, I know lots of people jump to different conclusions as to what to read into that steering wheel position, depending on whether you are a Max fan, a Lewis fan, just a general fan, or an ex-racing driver, with an axe to grind. So everyone had different opinions. So, yeah, I think it may be more consistent, but I don't think that would necessarily be better if we had permanent stewards. They may be more consistent, but maybe their point of view is counter to what some people would want their point of view to be. So it could be difficult, and I certainly wouldn't put my hand up for that job. It's difficult enough even with technical regulations, what is and isn't permissible. So a flexing rear wing, we changed the regulations. Flexing front wing, that's okay. Where do the rules choose to get applied? So it's tricky, and it must be very difficult for Michael Massey, who hasn't had the time to get his feet under the table and establish his reputation in the way that Charlie Whiting did. And I know Charlie Whiting had his detractors, but I think everyone was fairly happy that Charlie was relatively even-handed in tackling this stuff on balance over the years. So it's really difficult. And the championship, I don't think it will be decided from stewards' decisions, nor will it be decided from some of the incidents on track either. But I think in a year of all years, I think what we've had is the two top drivers have been doing absolutely the best job. The cars are absolutely neck and neck with each other, and the teams behind them, in terms of the design, the race strategy, especially tyre strategy with these teams, they've been so equal all through the year. I think we could all go back at the end of the season and pick, that is the moment that the championship was decided because the Pirelli blew out, or the wing flexed, or you got qualifying disqualification, or anything else, or you got wiped out by Bottas at turn one. There's lots of little moments this year, but I don't think there was actually anything pivotal and anything necessarily separating either of these two drivers.
Go on, Lee.
Just out of interest, what was your opinion of the Hamilton Max move?
Oh God, here we go. I would put that down to just hard and fast race driving and let them race. Hamilton threw it down the outside. Max threw it up the inside. Couldn't brake enough. Lewis couldn't brake enough. They were both way past their braking markers. They didn't touch. They both went off and came back the next lap. If that's not a definition of a racing incident, I don't know what is. But I think at the moment there seems to be a call in any incident that we look at is that there's got to be a right and a wrong. And it's, black and white. Someone, if you look at each of these incidents, you look at the Silverstone incident, the Monza incident, it's not 100% someone's fault. It's much more 60-40, 55, 45 is the other half, wasn't it? Yes. It's much more like that, and it's much harder to regulate in that respect, because if you give one person a penalty, then that's almost disproportionate for the other person. So I'm much more of the opinion try and let these people race, and I don't really think we've seen anything this year that's got to the stage where it's very dirty or very dangerous. And I think there's a lot of there's a word in football for it. It's when a player brings someone down where it looks like they were going for a tackle, but it was actually a foul, is it?
Professional foul.
Is it professional foul?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there was gameplay or something. I think it's something that we've seen a lot of that this year. I'm on the inside, therefore, or I was ahead on the outside, therefore, and almost using that as a, it wasn't me, Gov. That kind of shrug you give the referee if you just, broken someone's ankle because they were almost at the penalty box. And that's about as much as I know about football. I just hasten to add at this stage, don't go any further into football discussion because that's the limit of what I know.
I was actually going to say when you were talking about the stewards, there is a saying in football: if you don't notice the referee, he's had a good game.
Yes, that's possibly true, but equally when I was in football is maybe the referee should be seen a lot more. But that's going off at a complete tangent that I'm way untoo qualified to talk about. But yeah, I mean, I think it is consistent. I think that's the problem. But do we want consistency if it's at the cost of some of our personal opinions on what is right and wrong? I think it will just look slightly different. But me, I let them race a lot more than perhaps people make all this noise about.
I mean, there's three sides to every argument. There's the right side, the wrong side, and the truth.
That's true enough. And things are never black and white. Everything is a beigey shade and somewhere in between the two of them, isn't it?
Like a Nico Rosberg suit.
Exactly. Maybe he could be the driver steward.
Yeah, fair, balanced, even. It never worked.
Because the great thing with Nico is we know that all of the fans all across social media have all got the same balance view of him. So there you go.
I am a fan of Nico Rosberg Media Edition.
So moving on to the Red Bull and Mercedes cars, I think we can. Are we safe in saying that Red Bull have made the most leaps forward this year?
Oh yeah, no. I mean, I think it's. I think Mercedes have stepped back a bit in relative performance because of the regulation changes, but equally because of the pressures of the budget cap. Looking to next year and knowing where they were standing this time last year. Equally, Red Bull and Honda, it's important to say, made a step forwards this year, and they've kind of met in the middle and then kind of bounced against each other over these past 20-odd races. And that's been fascinating because you couldn't really get more different cars. One is a longer wheelbase, lower rake, albeit they are running a bit more rake this year. One of them is a slightly shorter wheelbase with a lot of rake. One power unit is very smooth and is now playing with a different inlet system. And that's nothing to do with the Red Bull accusations. It's just the shape of the plenums. And then you've got Honda, which is working really hard with the engine mapping at part throttle, which makes it sound like a bag of nails. And have really tried to miniaturize the engine within the regulations. Everything about both of those cars is completely different. The way that each of the teams go about their races in terms of race engineers and in terms of, race and tyre strategy, how the team principals operate, and, the ethos of the fact. They are polar opposites as much as you could possibly get in two groups of people that effectively, have the same budget to get to the same end position at the end of the season, and they're almost completely inseparable. And it's unbelievable that they can qualify within, hundredths of each other, race, and by the end of the race they're within a few meters of each other. I think, where were we? Was it Austin, where I think effectively they finished the race the same time distance apart as they did when they were on the grid as they passed the line on lap one. It's like, how close could you make these two things go? And you just know that everyone, or certainly a chunk of people, have a polarized opinion that, Lewis has had the best car all year, or Max has had the best car all year, or the best engine, or what have you, or the rules changed, or the tyres changed, or the circuits changed to suit one person or another. But it's just completely inseparable. And as we were saying earlier, it's got to the stage now where, is it a high-speed track? Should that suit one car or another? Is it a twisty track? Which car should that suit now? Is it hot track? Is it the softer range of the Pirellis or the harder range? All of that seems to go out the window, and each team seems to be tackling each of these races from a completely fresh set of perspectives. So it's impossible to predict. And we're now so tight that we could get to Abu Dhabi equal on points, which is absurd. And both teams have thrown a lot at the cars this year as well. I think Red Bull threw a lot more at the car in the early to mid-season. I think Mercedes have rather topped and tailed, and I think they've been quite coy about this as well. They did put a lot of effort in early in the year to try and recoup the losses they had over the winter. I think the mid-season tyre change really helped them as well, and they've thrown an absolute enormous amount of effort, which doesn't come under the budget cap, at that power unit this year. If you look at Bottas's engine changes, the super engine that we saw in Brazil, was it? Was that right? I'm trying to remember the races now.
Yes.
I'm getting confused. Yeah, had the kind of what Honda would have called a Suzuka spec engine kind of turned up for Mercedes in America, and will potentially come back next weekend as well. They've really had a very different approach to development through the year in different ways. And, I think Mercedes had done a lot more with their race engineering, a lot more with the power unit. I think Red Bull did a lot more with the chassis, and were building up to that big engine update, which was kind of latter part of the mid-season, wasn't it? And now they're starting to, lack a little something extra to give to the car. Although I have heard now rumours, albeit from Italy, which is a very unreliable place to get rumours for a British-Japanese engine, that there's going to be some updates to the Honda engine this weekend. How that's possible, I'm not entirely clear without grid penalties, but, rumours are rumours, so we'll park them and talk about them later. You really just cannot take this apart. And, I would say that we've had the most equal season that maybe I think I can ever really remember, because I think what you normally would have is half a season of dominance, then something would change and the another team would have a half season of dominance. But this, if you look at the points between the two drivers, it really has been just neck and neck throughout. And, thoroughly enjoyable from a fan's perspective. Unless you're a fan of one or the other drivers, of course.
Then you spend all your time. Then you spend all your time arguing with the fans of the other drivers on social media.
Yeah, I really hope
it's strange, isn't it? I'm sorry, I'll let you carry on.
I was just going to say, I really hope it goes to the last race because the championship deserves it to go to the last race.
I hope it does as well, and my reasoning is slightly different. If I think I'm not quite sure if Lewis can decide it this weekend. I don't think he can.
No, he can't.
But can he not? Okay. But if it was won this weekend, I think either way, let's say, for example, theoretically, just to be fair to both sides of the fan base, if either driver could win it this weekend in Saudi, I think the smug faces from one half of the sport in Abu Dhabi would be almost unbearable. And at least, by the time they turn the lights out in Abu Dhabi, most of us can kind of switch off for a couple of weeks until we come back in the new year and kind of just avoid all of the fanboys going at each other on either side. And it was funny because, we've had these various technical infringements being argued between the teams over the past few races. And I try, and I hope I certainly achieve in being even-handed and fair between being judgmental between what's right and wrong between the teams and just say it how it is. But if I say something about one team's car, you'll get the fanboys from the other team going, well, yeah, but that's cheating, or no, but they did this. And it's like, no, I'm just telling you how it is. I'm not saying if it's right or wrong. But people just love to dive in on the argument when there's not even an argument being made, is going, yeah, they're cheating people, but they're cheating and he's a dirty driver. No, it's just incredible how fired up people get on this. And sometimes it's funny, and sometimes it's quite tiring, isn't it? But I'm glad I don't opt to choose one side or another, because it must be such hard work for them.
Well, after Brazil, when we were recording the podcast, I noticed on Twitter that people were already calling me a Lewis Hamilton fanboy. The podcast hadn't even gone out, wasn't even finished recording, and I was already being called a fanboy.
Ah, right. My social media campaign to get people to do that worked. Yes.
I think the main thing is, if you get called a fanboy from each of the opposing factions, you know you're doing it right.
Yeah, I still haven't got over Jensen Button even.
Yeah, no, I mean, I still get people say I'm pro-Hamilton, anti-Hamilton, pro-Rosberg still, pro-Verstappen. I get described as a tifosi sometimes. And it's like, well, if you're all saying either plus or minus on each of them, I must be playing it. Yeah, it must be down the line, surely. But people love this to think, because you have an opinion, that it means you can only take one side of an argument. And I think, everything this year has been far more nuanced, between 100% blame from one and 0% on the other. It's all been much more muddled in the middle.
Mm. And it's definitely been a mess in some cases.
Yes.
Oh, that is brilliant. Just one thing that we haven't done on our normal race review: rock stars and wankers from the weekend. Hard one to call.
Okay.
Alonso rock star, definitely.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the only person you can call a rock star from last weekend, really. In the proper vintage Hall of Fame, Rolling Stones, Keith Richards, there's the old guys making it to the podium. Alonso is the Keith Richards of Formula One. I've said it. There you go. And I'm now an Alonso fanboy.
Same haircut, actually.
I'm not so sure. I know. It's Keith Richards. Can you describe that as a haircut? It's certainly a lot more grey than Alonso's.
Same haircut that Keith had in the late 60s, anyway.
Yeah, well, okay, that's probably a slight fairer, I guess. Yeah.
And
the other one, I would like to nominate two people who aren't drivers, oddly. And if you can guess who they are before I name them, I'm sure you could win a prize. Which would be Christian and Toto, who frankly are really getting on my nerves now. And I just have no time at all for either their opinions or the ridiculous opinions that the mainstream motorsport media insist on dragging out of them. Every question that they're given is a clickbait question, and it will be dragged out to say Christian said this or Toto said that. I'm just completely over that whole thing now. So yeah, they win the other award this weekend.
I would also like to throw in whichever strategist decided to ignore old Pirelli's advice and go for one-stoppers.
Absolutely, I'd go with that one as well. Yes, it's like when Pirelli say don't run long of these tyres, you'll never make a one-stopper. In fact, a two-stopper's quicker. Don't listen to that advice. Yeah.
No, but I think I should probably get the inaugural Hold My Beer award. We've got a Giovinazzi participation for this week. I'm tempted to say Bottas, because he was never sort of really on it due to a variety of reasons. Failing that, we just go default and give it to Giovinazzi again.
I'm just having a little think through. Yeah, I think Bottas, of all of them, probably is the person that didn't really rock up to the weekend. Maybe Vettel slightly. It was a weekend you'd have thought maybe he'd have done a little bit better. But I think maybe Lance just overperformed slightly. But yeah, no, let's go with it. Yeah, definitely. Bottas, wingman once more. And it'll be interesting to see how he copes next year. I don't know if we kind of picked up on that in the alpha discussion. Whether he does kind of shine in that position or kind of shrinks back. It'll be a tough year for him next year, definitely.
I think there seems to be, for me anyway, sort of very little to suggest that he's going to do much more than what he's doing for Mercedes but but lower down the grid.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, I think Bottas came in 2013, 2014 were his kind of big two seasons, and particularly 14 when he had that really good Williams, and everyone was claiming him to be a potential champion. And I do wonder, actually, just thinking out loud now, if those subsequent years at Williams kind of blunted his abilities, and suddenly falling into Mercedes, it just, all of the cars didn't stack up right for him. And again, I mean, having a 1 year, he always felt a little bit under pressure at Mercedes. He said the 1 year contracts never really worked for him mentally. So, we'll see. I mean, I think, he always showed potential, and I don't think we ever really saw that actually come out of him. Good driver, but not, exceptional.
I think he's one of those drivers that I always say on the podcast that certain people, Formula One has to come to them. With these new rules, is it he might just look in and his style clicks with that type of car. It's in the same way as Vettel clicked well with that really stable rear end.
Yeah, that's true. Again, his podcast was really interesting. He was talking about what we would do after Formula One. He said he might go to rallying. I could see him doing endurance racing and really being the right kind of person for, doing Le Mans, potentially things maybe like the Dakar or Extreme. Maybe that is his bag rather than the extremes of Formula One.
It must be tough, to come into Mercedes and get given a car where you can win in it, but then get met with the obstacle that is having to get past Lewis Hamilton to do it.
No, by no means should we underestimate on a 1 year contract to be asked to go and do that, and coming into a team that is so clearly from the very top wrapped around Lewis as the key thing. He was always potentially on a loser there, wasn't he? What was the best that he could do, really? If he outshone Hamilton, that would have been an incredible achievement for so many reasons.
Thing is, I think he was onto a loser because if Bottas had come in and started winning and even taking a couple of championships, it's the car. What happened was he came in, gets second. He's just not up to Hamilton's standard. It was a bit of complete no win for him.
And it was because he was on a 1 year contract. If he was suddenly doing really well, then there would be the needle with him and Lewis, like Lewis had with Nico, and that would come really tricky when it came to contract time with Toto. So there was so many things stacked against him in this role, and he's been at Mercedes for a good few years now. And it's going to be tough for him going down to, admittedly, it's down. We have to say that, don't we, to Alfa Romeo Sauber. And it'd be a real test of him as a mature man, as an adult, to see whether he blossoms or whether he's a journeyman or whether he actually does realise that I just don't want to be doing this. So, it'll be interesting the conversations that we have around that next year.
That'll be a good one to say. You got me looking forward to next season already. I was looking forward to the winter break first.
Well, there's hardly a winter break at all, to be honest. I mean, we finish with 2 weeks till Christmas, and then it'll be a blur for those of you that drink or have families that you run around while not drinking over Christmas. It would be my situation. And then we'll be into, previews and predictions for the year, then seeing the new cars and then testing and then straight into what's going to be a pretty horrific year in terms of workload for everybody in the sport. The drivers, the people at the teams, both at the track and at the factories, the people like us, the media and the PR, and even just the fans devoting, 23 weekends plus a couple of testing weeks as well to Formula One. It's going to be hard work, but there's just going to be so much to cover. I think we'll be due a really well-deserved break this time next year. But I think we'll have a cracking season by the time we come to that stage.
Of course, Craig, I do hope you'll come back for the season preview next year when we finally get to see what the new cars look like in each team's iteration of them.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how late the teams show their cars off and how they show them off. I think we're going to have a lot of media online-only launches where we get someone's turbo squid model of the car dumped in front of the press that bears very little relationship to the genuine car. Maybe even just livery launches on the cab models that we've seen already. So, and also the whispers is the first test is going to be very much tyre test, and the Bahrain hot weather test will be the one where they start to get the bits and pieces out. So, there may be bits that we don't even see to the first few races or even the first European races. It's going to be a year of just relentless waiting for the next bit to be added to all of the cars. And I'm going to probably run out of paper and pens.
Am I right in thinking that the first test in Barcelona, that's not even going to get the TV coverage this time because F1 want to promote the whole Bahrain test just because that's when we'll see more of what 2022 is going to look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of reasons and counter reasons. I think the main reason is that it is literally just going to be a shakedown for the chassis and the tyres and the brakes and everything. And it will get really exciting when we get to Bahrain. So, yeah, it won't be... I don't believe it will be televised live as it does. I think there will be end-of-day shows and reviews and things on F1 TV. Get a little plug in there. Watch that Tech Talk. On Sky, on all of the other broadcasters. Obviously, the press will be there. I think even though it's not live, I think there'll be no lack of coverage on every aspect of lap time, drivers, tech, everything from that test. It's going to be pretty full on, I think.
We might even have access to F1 TV in the Isle of Man by then. You never know.
Well, you can already get the basic subscription, which does get you, I should point out, live timing and access to Tech Talk.
Not in the Isle of
featuring someone just.
Not really? In the Isle of Man, it doesn't, Craig. No, it's geo-blocked over here.
Even the basic.
No, they don't recognise it to watch it because I've got a subscription, but I have to go through a UK VPN. It doesn't recognise Isle of Man IP addresses.
I didn't realise that. I'd have thought that would have been counted, but such as the vagaries of living in a place like the Isle of Man, it's not quite like many other places in the UK. Maybe Hull and the Isle of Wight being the exceptions.
Naturally, I wouldn't do something like this. But
yeah, obviously you can't use the VPN. I hasten to point out that doesn't work, does it?
No, not at all. It certainly doesn't save £75 on Sky either.
When I say use a VPN to watch it, I've got to connect to my UK-based server and watch it through there. So I'm networking into my UK server.
VPN being the ferry that takes you to the mainland of the UK.
But if I could watch the live races on F1 TV, I would say I enjoy the build-up and the coverage. I would do if I watched it.
If you could possibly do that in the UK, which you can't.
No.
But if you could, yes.
Right. We are going to skip the Who's a Total Shunt this week, mainly because we're down on numbers, so it would be unfair on the rest of us. Do you reckon, Lee?
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that.
But when we do a show over Christmas, we'll do extra shunts. So instead of that, don't worry, I've got a few as well, including one of the regulars on Discord who sent it to me because he said there is no way that you would be able to do his name whatsoever because it's very, very Irish.
Well, I mean, that's no fun, is it? I just do what I usually do for names. If I can't read them, I make them up.
Yep, so Sid, I'll do the shunt. But we're going to have a competition. We're going to have a competition instead.
Okay.
Yeah, F1 journalist Maurice Hamilton has a new book out, which I mentioned last week, a tribute to Murray Walker called Incredible, with an exclamation mark. It's basically a celebration of the life of Murray Walker, who was the voice of Formula One for many, many years. It's been put together with tributes from Lewis Hamilton, Damon Hill, Nigel Mansell, Sir Jackie Stewart. Craig, I was looking for you in the index, but you're not mentioned. You're gonna have to...
No, my anecdote didn't make it in, unfortunately.
But it goes through Murray's career right from. I mean, the first photo it actually has some symbolic meaning over here, because it's a picture of Murray on his dad's motorbike on the finish line at the TT.
Yeah.
Because he's got a connection with the TT as well. His father rode in it. I think he rode in it once. He commentated on it. So right up to through his Formula One days. I can't say enough good things about this book. I mean, let's face it, the guy was an absolute legend. Yeah,
it's highly recommended. I was speaking to Morris about it as well the other week. Yeah, no, if you don't win it in this competition, put it on your Christmas list, because it's anyone that grew up in that era or even knows about that era, it's one of those books you just have to have. Such a great guy.
And if you don't know about the era, read it and find out, because it then you'll know what we're talking about when we get all Grandpa Simpson and nostalgic, and it's not just old men shouting at a cloud. No. Thank you to whoever left that review on iTunes. So, all you have to do to win this, it's an email competition. You know the email address by now, 3legs4wheels@gmail.com. Put competition entry as the title, or Murray competition as the title of the email. And all we want to know is where and when was the first Grand Prix that Murray commentated on for the BBC? Dead easy. So just tell us the Grand Prix and the year. And we will get all the correct answers and draw one out of the hat, maybe two if I can wangle an extra copy. If you're listening, publicity department at Penguin Random House, and we will get those off to you, so you'll get them in time for Christmas. And believe me, it's a prize worth having. I think a few people that I know may be getting copies of that Secret Santa this year. If I get dragged into Secret Santaing at work. I think that's about it really for this week, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
I think we've exhausted it. Yeah, we just have to look forward to the next race now. Yeah,
we'll have a preview coming up for the inaugural Saudi Arabian Grand Prix around the streets of Jeddah if they finish building the circuit.
I'm sure I'll be ready.
Yeah, they're good at throwing things up quickly for stuff like that. It may look like a Formula E circuit or Valencia, but there'll still be racing of some description. So we'll be back.
We'll look forward to that.
We'll be back next week to look forward to that. We've got Virtual Statman coming on in a couple of weeks' time as well. So we're keeping going till the end of the season. In the meantime, if you want to get hold of us, we are at 3legs4wheels on the socials, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and individually on Twitter we are.
I'm at a total shunt.
I am Pablo100,
and I am at Scarpstech.
And if you want to get hold of Chris or Sean, they are at Sean Cowper and at Flood21. Don't forget to leave your predictions for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. That's open on the website. And I forgot to do the Formula Lee announcement, which is back, and we're running it through Discord. Get a link on the site. And I think this week we are going to do. Actually, Craig, pick a circuit.
Any circuit?
Any current circuit.
This sounds like a really bad magic trick.
It does. Imola.
Right, which is in the game. And Lee, you can choose the car.
A Haas.
You're evil. Right, okay, so it's Imola in a Haas, and you have until the, I want to say 6th of December. Yep, 6th of December, 7 o'clock UK time. Get your answers in. You can either get your times in. You can either email them to formula-lee@3legs4wheels.com, or go on to Discord and look for the Formula Lee Times channel, and you'll be able to get the link to Discord from our website, 3legs4wheels.com. I'm shattered now after talking that much. Thanks again, Craig, for joining us. It's always good when you're on. We get so much insight into the technical sides of things, and hopefully you'll be able to join us again when we know what the 2022 cars look like.
Yeah, it's been interesting tonight. I think certainly next year we're going to have lots more fun in talking about this stuff. Thanks very much, both you guys.
Definitely.
Cheers,
thanks a lot. Right, we'll see you next week, and hopefully Sean and Chris will be back with us as well. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.